The Shir on Likutei Sichos, book 28, Chelek of Ches, the portion of Chukas, the second Sicha. Okay, we're going to study an academic topic, but mostly it's going to be relevant to Avodat Hashem, to the source of Hashem, in overcoming our feelings and being prepared to forgive somebody even if they've wronged us. Let's jump in and see it inside. In the Parsha, the Torah tells us, this is the Parsha of Nechash HaNechoshet, Parsha of the copper snake, which goes as following. The people spoke against Hashem and they spoke against Moshe. So Hashem sent to smite the people snakes, etc. The people came to Hashem and they said, we've sinned. They came to Moshe and they said, we've sinned. Hitpalel el Hashem, please pray to Hashem, and the snake shall be taken away from us. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for the people. So Rashi comments on the words Vayitpalel Moshe that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed, and he explains, from here we derive the following premise. Somebody from whom they ask forgiveness shouldn't be cruel or shouldn't be angry and withhold that forgiveness. So perhaps somebody's done something wrong to somebody else and then they have regret, they come and ask forgiveness. So the person that's been wronged should not withhold forgiveness, should not be cruel and not forgive. V'yesh gorsim. There are some versions of Rashi. Achzari limchol. Not shelo yehe achzari milimchol. He shouldn't be cruel from forgiving, but rather he shouldn't be cruel to forgive. And the Rabbi brings in footnote number 3. That's the way it is in the first print of Rashi, and in several of the manuscripts, Kitvei Yad, some of the handwritten versions of Rashi that I have, says the Rabbi in my library, it says this second girsa. So let's revisit the two versions of this, how this is worded. From here, the beginning is the same. Somebody who they asked for him to forgive. First version is Shelo yehei achzari milimchol. He shouldn't be cruel and not forgive. Or this other version of Rashi, he shouldn't be cruel to forgive. You would imagine that the first one seems to make more sense at face value. He shouldn't be cruel and withhold forgiveness. Yet there's another version again, which is the first print, and there's many written versions of Rashi, says he shouldn't be cruel to forgive. So we don't understand what that means. So the source of this commentary is in Medrash Tanchuma. And there it says, Lohodia and vetanuto shel Moshe. This comes to teach us the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu. Shelo nishtahel levakesh aleim rachamim. That he didn't delay or take any time to immediately move into the mode of asking forgiveness for them. He didn't make them come back and ask again and beg. The moment that they asked him for forgiveness, he jumped straight into action and prayed to Hashem. Also, so it teaches us the greatness of Moshe, the humility, that he was ready to accept the ask for forgiveness immediately. And also to tell you, koach hatshuvah, the power of teshuvah, return. The moment Bnei Yisrael said, we sinned, right away Moshe Rabbeinu was pleasant towards them, forgave them. And this teaches us she'eina mochel na'aseh lehem achzari, that the one who's forgiving does not maintain a level of distance or cruelty or hardness to make them come back again and again. And immediately when they asked, he forgave them. Similarly, it says about Avraham Avinu. When Avimelech sinned unknowingly against Avraham, he took Sarah to the palace and he found out that Sarah was really Avraham's wife. He went and he asked, and he got sick. He went and he apologized. He said to Avraham, I've sinned, and Avraham immediately prayed on his behalf, and Hashem healed Avimelech. And then there's another pasuk from Eov, but that's we're not going to comment on that. So we have to understand, if the Tanchuma said that the earlier source, where do we know that you have to immediately forgive when asked, is from Avraham? Why does Rashi here say mikan, that from this story with Moshe Rabbeinu we learn that the moment somebody asks you to forgive, you should forgive? We already have an earlier pasuk in historically many generations earlier when the story took place with Avraham. Furthermore, this teaching that we have from Avraham is actually a Mishnah in the tractate of Baba Kama. What does it say there? The Af al Pishu not tenlo. There it's talking about the laws of damages. The laws of damages are that if somebody injures somebody else, there are 5 kinds of payments that need to be made. There's the payment of nezek, the damage. Let's say, God forbid, somebody damaged somebody's arm. So we see how much the person is of lesser value now. Today, that's a little bit more difficult, but perhaps not totally impossible. But in the days when there was a slave market, you could see a slave that has a damaged arm, how much less is he sold on the slave market as a slave who has 2 functioning arms. And that difference is nezek, is the damage. Sa, you have to account for the fact that he has pain. In other words, what we figure out is, if that person would have a damaged arm, but it could happen without pain, how much would he pay not to have pain? It happened to him through pain. So in other words, how much is the pain factor? Different people will tolerate different things for different amounts of money. Somebody who's very rich, he'll pay a lot more money not to have pain. His pain value is more than somebody who's unfortunately not so rich and has to put up with more pain. Ripui, paying the healing costs. Shevet, the fact that he can't work. And then boshet. Boshet is the shamefulness, humiliation. When the guy beat him up, he was humiliated. Right. How to figure out shevet is a different question. But especially since you've already paid for his loss, you paid nezek. I'll call upon him, but the point being that the Mishnah says, even though he gives him all the payments, so this guy has been damaged. Reuven, God forbid, damaged Shimon. He paid him 5 payments, took care of all the things that Torah tells us to pay him. Ein nimchalo. He's still not forgiven from the humiliation that he humiliated him, or from the pain and the humiliation, until he requests forgiveness from him. As it says, Va'ata hashev eshet ish. It says, Vitpalel ba'atcha v'chyei. It says that in the story of Avimelech, that returned the man's wife, he's a prophet, Avraham Avinu, returned his wife, and ask, Vitpalel ba'atcha, and ask that he should pray for you. In other words, not enough that he just returns the wife and automatically he'll be healed. You need still to ask forgiveness for Avraham, even though you made good what you did wrong. Now you need still Avraham to forgive you. That's what the Mishnah says. And then the Mishnah continues, so how do you know that if the one who wronged the person doesn't forgive, that he's considered cruel? So there, as it says, that immediately as soon as Avimelech asked Avraham for forgiveness, Avraham indeed prayed for him, and Hashem healed Avimelech. So we have a Mishnah that tells us the same law. So if so, why does Rashi, who's saying the simple meaning of the pasuk, tell us that this law is learned from this story with Moshe Rabbeinu, whereas the Mishnah says we learn it from an earlier story in history from Abraham praying for Avimelech? Yeah. Not b'ma ze shoneh. If we have a Mishnah and we have an earlier clearly stated story in the Torah, which the Tanchuma and the Mishnah are learning from, so why does Rashi choose to say that the basis, mikan, where do we know the concept that a person should agree to forgive from this story where they prayed to Moshe Rabbeinu after they spoke against him, and Moshe spoke? It's a different story, but it's the same lesson. Why are we learning the lesson from here? We should have already learned it from Avraham Avinu. Moreover, strengthens the Rebbe the question. The story of Avraham, there's a greater chidush. There's a greater teaching in the way and in the obligation of how you forgive. both when we're talking about Homer Hachet, both when we're talking about the stringency of the sin, the fact that Sarah, his wife, was taken to the house of Avimelech seems to be a greater pigiyah b'tzar, a greater offense, and cause greater pain than the fact that Dibru b'Moshe, that they spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, Avimelech took a wife. Here we have the people spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe can say, okay, he forgives. What did they do? They spoke against him. We say sticks and stones can break my bones. Words will never hurt me. Here they took his wife. Yet still, even though they took his wife, right, he forgave. Avraham prayed b'shul for Avimelech. Also, when we talk about the forgiveness and taking away the punishment, there it says that Avraham Avinu prayed, Vayitpalel Avraham, and immediately Vayirpa Elokim, without any other efforts, Hashem healed Avimelech and his wife. Whereas here, there was a whole procedure. You have to make the image of a snake, and the people that were bitten, the people that were bitten had to look up at the snake, and then they remembered Hashem, and then they came back, then they lived. The punishment was not taken away immediately and instinctively just after they asked for forgiveness. So if you want to bring a strong teaching that when you offend somebody, you should ask forgiveness, and they shouldn't be cruel and not forgive, bring it from the greater case, which is Avram and Avimelech, where something much worse than speaking against Avram was done. Literally, his wife was violated. He didn't violate her, but he took her. And also the effect of the Mechila, the effect of the Tefillah of Avraham Avinu was more impactful. Right away, he brought a refuah, right away brought a total cessation of the punishment. Whereas here, where Moshe Rabbeinu prays for the Jewish people, there's still a process where Hashem says you need to go through a process. It wasn't an immediate thing. So the greatest story seems definitely to be the story of Avimelech and Avraham Avinu. So why does Rashi insist that Mikan, the place that we learn this story, is from here? Paragraph 2. L'cha'ira would seem that we'd be able to answer why does Rashi say we learn it from here? Because according to the Peshuto Shel Mikra, according to the simple reading of the pasuk, Rashi is learning that it's specifically in this parsha here, in this story, that there's a request to forgive. Because here the Jews say the language is Chatanu, we have sinned, say the Jewish people to Moshe. Ki dibarnu ba'Hashem vavach, for we have sinned against Hashem and against you, Moshe. Hitpalel Hashem, pray to Hashem. With Avimelech didn't really ask properly, Mechila asked forgiveness. What does he say? He says, Me'asita lanu, Avraham Avinu, what did you do? Mechatati lach, what did I sin against you? That you brought upon me and upon my kingdom a great sin. Things that would never be done, you did with me. Why did you do that? In other words, why didn't you tell me it's your wife? You told me it's your sister, so I took her. I thought she was available. Why did you do that? It's not. It's not really a request for forgiveness. It's almost a claim against Avraham Avinu. What did you do? That's not mechila, and that's in the Tosefta, which that same Mishnah we quoted from Baba Kama. There's a different version in Tosefta. Tosefta is a Braisa that tells us there was no real request for forgiveness by Avimelech, and it says. Tosefta has a take on this story that somebody who damages his friend, even if the damager doesn't ask the one who was injured to pray to forgive him, nonetheless, the one who was injured shouldn't harbor a resentment and a grudge. He should pray for the one that harmed him. How do we know that? It says Vayitpalel Avraham Elokim, because it says Avraham prayed to Hashem. In other words, the Tosefta does learn the story that Avimelech never asked forgiveness. Avraham Avinu was magnanimous. He was Gomel Chesed. He did kindness to the party that had caused him a grievance, but he didn't really ask for mechila. So that's why Rashi can't learn that story, that concept of asking mechila, asking forgiveness from the story of Avimelech, right? So only here in this story, where clearly the Bnei Yisrael are asking forgiveness, we learned the lesson that we have to apply to our own lives, that when somebody asks forgiveness for something they did wrong against you, you shouldn't be cruel and not forgive them. But you can't really say that. That Rashi can only learn it from here. Why? Because that's going to make even a stronger question. Why don't we learn, if Rashi is trying to teach us how to behave and be forgiving, why doesn't Rashi learn like the Tosefta says? An even greater teaching, that when somebody does something wrong to you, nonetheless, you shouldn't be cruel and you should forgive him. Just like we find that Avraham Avinu prayed for Avimelech, even though he didn't really ask him forgiveness. If you're trying to teach us how to be Baalei Midot, how to have good character traits, on the contrary, come to the story of Avraham and Avimelech and say, look, even though he kind of didn't really ask forgiveness, nonetheless, Avraham Avinu forgave him and prayed for him. So that's one question. Also, now the Rebbe goes on a bit of a square bracket here in the original, the next 4 paragraphs. You also can't learn, according to what we've just said, it says Vayitpalel Avraham, that Avraham Avinu prayed. It's not an indication that he forgave him, because it's possible that he asked for mercy from Hashem without Avimelech asking forgiveness, and without Avraham Avinu giving forgiveness, just like davening for Sodom. In Sodom, it's not that Avraham Avinu says they were good guys, and that, he said, look, Hashem, they're bad guys, the Sodomites, but still, maybe there's some good guys, maybe you should spare them. But not that Avraham Avinu somehow forgave. Because we just asked, why don't we learn Mikan, from the story of Avraham, that you should be mochel, you should forgive, even if the person didn't ask for forgiveness. And I was saying, you would maybe try and say, maybe there's no forgiveness. But you can't say that. Why? Because, first of all, it's difficult to say that he asked mercy for Avimelech, even though they didn't ask for forgiveness, even though he didn't forgive really. He's standing there angry, but still asking for forgiveness. That's two-faced. It doesn't really work. Also, that would mean to say that in our parsha, how do we know that Moshe forgave? Because it says Vayitpalel Moshe. Moshe prayed for them. Now, if we're going to say that Vayitpalel Avraham maybe means that he prayed for them, but he didn't really forgive them, how does Rashi here take the same words Vayitpalel Moshe and teach us? From here we see that if they ask forgiveness, you have to forgive them. That same Vayitpalel can't mean by Avraham that he really didn't forgive them, he just prayed for them. But here Rashi says it means he prayed for them. When you pray for somebody, it means because you feel for them. So we have to say that the word Vayitpalel, when it says that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for them, it means it's a proof that there was really a forgiveness. And similarly, therefore, when it says Vayitpalel Avraham that Avraham prayed for Avimelech, it would mean that he forgave him. Okay, so maybe Avimelech didn't ask for forgiveness, but if Avraham forgave him, so there's a much bigger lesson in the story of Avimelech and Avraham, that even if he doesn't ask you, forgive him. So why does Rashi insist that the only place we learn this teaching, that when somebody asks you to forgive, even if he does something wrong to you, don't be cruel and hold back forgiveness from this story. Why? Why not Avimelech? Paragraph 3. So the Chayra we will be able to say. First glance, perhaps we could say as following: that according to Rashi, the words Vayitpalel Avraham that Avraham Avinu prayed doesn't teach us this lesson. Why? Because there really didn't need to be any request of forgiveness from the side of Avraham. Why? Avimelech said, I did it betom levavi. I did it with a simplicity of heart, with an unknowingness. I didn't know it's your wife. And Hashem says, when Hashem comes to Avimelech and says, what did you do? Hashem agrees. Gam anochi adati ki betom levavcha asit hazot. I know that you did it with an unknowing heart, with a naivete. You didn't know. And and I didn't let you sin either. Hashem said, Hashem made Avimelech sick, that he couldn't come close. He couldn't do anything with Sarah. I know you didn't intend anything. In other words, he didn't intend to do something bad to Avraham. So he doesn't have to ask forgiveness. So you can't talk here about the laws of forgiveness. He didn't do anything wrong, really. And so is also, you see in the pasuk, with the words of Hashem to Avimelech, where he says, "V'ata hashev eshet ha'ish ki navihu v'yitpalel b'atcha v'yechyeh." Now, go and return this the wife of this man because he's a prophet, and let him pray for you and you'll live. All he has to do, Hashem says, is bring her back. And then immediately Avraham will pray for you. And as Rashi says, don't think he's going to hate you, Avraham, because of what you did. He won't pray for you. He's a Navi. He knows you didn't do anything. Because he's a prophet, he knows, as Rashi says, Shalom agataba, that you didn't touch her. So he'll pray for you. So you could see, it would seem to say that Rashi, the way Rashi learns this saga, this story, there's really no bakashat mechila, there's no asking for forgiveness, because Avimelech didn't really do something wrong. So maybe that's why he can't learn the teaching that when somebody asks you for forgiveness, you should forgive from the story of Avimelech, because maybe there wasn't really asking, there was no need to ask forgiveness. Says the Rabbi, you can't say that. Why? Because if you look at that story of Avimelech, the continuation, it says, Vayikach Avimelech tzon v'akar, Avimelech took sheep and cattle, v'avadim u'shfachot, and servants and maidservants, v'yitein l'Avraham, and he gave them to Avraham. And what does Rashi say? Why did he give such a lavish gift? Kedei sheyitpayes, so that he should be appeased. Yitpalel alav, he should pray for him. So we do understand that there needs to be an appeasement. Something was done wrong here. There needs to be a request that Avraham Avinu forgive him. Also, from the fact that Avraham Avinu did not resist taking the gift, right? He took the gift. So if it would have been unnecessary, if nothing wrong had been done, and it wasn't part of the appeasement process, why did Avraham Avinu take it? So Avraham Avinu took it, and indeed that was a form of asking for forgiveness, and then he prayed for him. And we understand simply, so why Taka did he need to ask forgiveness? What did he do wrong? He didn't know it's his wife. Because no, we can understand why. Because since in the end of the day, Sof, Avimelech sinned, a very severe sin against Avram. He took his wife. Maybe he didn't mean it, but still, that's what the reality, absolute reality was, that Avram Avinu's wife was taken by Avimelech. This is a great violation already. So he has to ask forgiveness. Avimelech has to ask forgiveness. And Avraham has to agree to forgive. And the Rebbe quotes in Ha'ara 27, I'm going to quote it, 27 star, that in Shulchan Aruch it says that somebody who damages his friend, even shelo bekavana, even unintentionally, ein mitkaper lo ad shivakesh manav yimcholo. Even if he pays him for his damage, but the full kapara, the full atonement is not until he asks him for forgiveness, but he didn't intend to do it. It doesn't matter. If something, even unintentionally, something bad happened to something else through your action, you have to take responsibility for it, and not just take financial responsibility, you also have to take emotional responsibility and ask forgiveness. But he didn't mean it. So here also, in the end of the day, Avimelech violated a gross violation. He took his wife. So the pashtus, he needs to ask forgiveness. If so, we come back to the original question. If after this whole discussion about the story of Avimelech and Sarah, we now understand that nonetheless, something wrong happened here. And there needs to be mechila. And it's beautiful that we see in Shulchan Aruch that there needs to be a request for mechila, even in halacha. So the question goes back: why don't we learn the law that a person shouldn't withhold forgiveness, be cruel and withhold forgiveness? Why don't we learn it from Avimelech? Why does Rashi insist that mikan, from this story of Moshe Rabbeinu and the sinning of the Jewish people against them and him forgiving, we learn it from here? By the way, just going back a second to the fact that there needed to be a bakashat mechila, there needed to be a forgiveness from Avraham's part, and Avimelech needed to ask for forgiveness, and Avraham had to forgive, points out the Rebbe in a footnote. Muchach 28. The fact that Avraham had to pray, and that Hashem didn't automatically make Avimelech heal the moment that he brought back Sarah, we see that there's an element of there's an element of blockage in the healing of Avimelech that has to do with, does Avraham Avinu feel that he can forgive or not? He had to first pray for that. So anyway, we're left with the question we originally started with. The Rabbi gave several proposals for answers, but none of them fits. None of them actually stands to the test of investigation. So, paragraph 4. Now we're going to totally revolutionize this whole concept. You see here, the Rebbe looks at a Rashi, brings us to a totally new dimension. Paragraph 4, so let's understand it by first looking in the language of Rashi. Language is shelo yehei achzari milimchol. He shouldn't be cruel from not forgiving. In the Tanchuma it says, the language is different. She'ein hamochel naaseh achzari, that the forgiver should not be cruel. Or shelo yehei hamochel achzari, right? And in the Mishnah it says, similar language. We saw the Mishnah, what was the language of the Mishnah? Language of the Mishnah was uminayin shim lo machallo shehu achzari. How do we know that if he didn't forgive, then the forgiver is considered cruel? Everything, we're defining the person as being a cruel person. Rashi's language is different. Not that the forgiver should not be cruel, rather he shouldn't be cruel from forgiving. What does that mean? What does that mean? There's a nuance here. Not that the person shouldn't be cruel, right? But rather he shouldn't be cruel from forgiving. So let's understand the way the Rebbe unpacks the difference. Mechila, forgiveness can be in two ways. It could be A, somebody is meichel, somebody forgives the sin that was done against him, so that the person who sinned shouldn't have a punishment. So A did bad to somebody else. The person who bad was done knows that A is going to suffer for the sin. He says, I forgive this sin. I don't want this negative sin to be on your account because Hashem is going to punish it. I forgive you for that negative thing. There's another way of forgiving, and that is that he forgives the person. He goes deeper. Doesn't just look at the act that was done, but he says, I don't harbor any tina. I don't harbor any resentment to the one who did bad in my heart. Number 3, the third deepest level of forgiveness is that the person totally forgives him with a complete heart, in as much that he is mirutzeh v'chaviv lefanav kekodem achet. He's beloved to him as much as he was even before he did anything wrong. Oh, so now let's see in a different besignon acher, to put it in a little bit different words, says the Rebbe. In the first way, he forgives the other person's sin. Okay, the person did something bad to the one who has to forgive, so he forgives the act that was done. In the deeper level, he forgives the person that did the act. In the deeper level, he totally uproots the sin as if it was never there. And the person is in his eyes as deep and close a friend as he always was before there was ever anything that came between them. Right? We find this concept in Teshuvah Me'ahava, coming back to Hashem from love, that it says if the sin never took place. Right? Ne'ekar avono mitchilato. The sin is uprooted from the very beginning. We're not talking here about right now about the level of zdonot gezachiyot. What's the difference? So now we just gave a theoretical hakdara. We spoke about 3 different gradients. What does it mean to forgive somebody? Do you forgive just the act that was done? Do you forgive the person? Or do you not just forgive the person, but you totally come back to a pre-anything being wrong state? Well, we all know that sometimes a person says, do you forgive me? And the guy did something bad. He says, okay, yeah, I forgive what was done. Then the person but you still don't like the person. Then the person says, yeah, but can you forgive me? Yeah, but you're not going to do business with him again. And then there can be a deeper level where it's as if nothing happened. You're so friendly, you'll go and do business with him again. What's the difference? A person is only thinking that the other person shouldn't get punished on behalf of what he did. So what he does when he forgives him is he forgives him only to the extent that this particular wrongdoing shouldn't have any effect on the person who did bad. When we talk about the second and third level. So he's interested not just that this sin shouldn't be detrimental to the other person. He wants to make sure that the other person should be in a good, he cares about the total persona of the other person. He wants to do whatever he can that the other person should be able to reach a place where he is pre-sin, where he's totally absolved, where he's totally back to a good space. So now let's understand, you care for the person just so he shouldn't get, just in the way of your relationship or the bad that was done. Okay, I want this bad to go out. I don't want you to suffer from this bad deed. Or am I now looking at the person totally saying, I want you to be totally healed from this thing, but of course, but I want you in general. I'm out for your good. That's what's really of interest to me. Where will we see the difference play out in the Torah, in the stories of the Torah? Paragraph 5. This is the difference between Avraham Avinu praying for Avimelech and, Moshe Rabbeinu forgiving the Jewish people in our parsha. By Avraham, it says, Vayitpalel Avraham el Elokim. Avraham prayed to Hashem, Vayirpa Elokim et Avimelech, Vayeledu, and Hashem healed Avimelech, and their orifices, the holes to their body were opened up. They were all constipated. They couldn't do anything that involved the ins and outs of the bodies. They were totally blocked. Avraham prayed for Avimelech, and they were open. They were able to function again with their human bodily needs and so on. That's what it says by Avimelech and Avraham. In our parsha, it says not just Vayitpalel Moshe el Hashem, that Moshe prayed to Hashem for the Bnei Yisrael, like it says that Avraham prayed to Elokim. It says Vayitpalel Moshe be'ad ha'am. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed on behalf of the people, not just to get rid of the effect, but he looked at them. He was praying for their total overall spiritual state. For him, it was very, very relevant. And he took very much to heart, are the people back at their good state as they were prior to this whole silly complaint against me and Hashem? He didn't just want to take away the punishment, take away the snakes. He wanted their whole situation to be rectified. It's almost like saying, when you go to a doctor, is the doctor just looking at treating this particular ailment? It gives you a treatment just for this thing that's hurting you in this place? Or is he looking at the patient in a totality and saying, I want to treat this, but first I also want to treat, the person should be in a wellness situation. The person should be overall healthy. And you see it here in the language. Avraham Avinu prayed, Avraham prayed to Hashem just about healing Avimelech. Vayitpalel Moshe be'ad ha'am. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to Hashem, not just for the snakes, but in general, for the status, for the state, for the spiritual well-being of the Jewish people. That's why the pasuk continues. And Hashem says, yes, aseh lecha saraf. Make for yourself a serpent. What does lecha mean? Pshuta shamikra is mishalcha. Make it of your own money. Like Rashi has already told us, when the instruction comes to make 2 trumpets of silver, it has to be of your own expense. I mean, you would ask, if the expense here is to get mechila, is to get forgiveness for Klal Yisrael, shouldn't this be a company expense, so to speak? Shouldn't this be a community expense? Who's Moshe Rabbeinu praying for? Why does he have to spend his own money to create an antidote to a problem that Bnei Yisrael made? Definitely, this should come from the community. No, but what the pasuk here is telling us is that Hashem says he should do it in a way that it should be evident that Moshe Rabbeinu cares deeply about fixing the situation. Spend your own money, your own effort. What does that show? That he's not just trying to surface level take away the punishment. He cares about the people. There's something beautiful about spending money. It shows that you care. And this was the purpose of making this nechash nechoshet, this snake of copper, not just to be an instrument to bring about the healing of the Jewish people, but also to be able to arouse the Jewish people that the Bnei Yisrael should look at this snake. They look upwards, and they meditate on Maila, they meditate on Hashem's presence. And then when they meditate on Hashem's presence, Avim Shabashamayim, they do teshuvah. They return to Hashem not just from this particular sin of talking against Hashem, but they become in general, Shiabuda Lev LaShamayim, they enslave their heart to heaven. They commit to Hashem. That's why it says, place it on a high spot, and Vayayim Nashacha Nachashet Ish, if the snake bit somebody, Vihibit. Hibit means a deep, intensive look. Hibit is not just a glance. Hibit. Look and meditate on this serpent and you will live. And Rashi explains that it means a deep look. And this is looking, as Rashi said, Shelo hayam memaher nashucha nachash lihitrapot elam ke mabit po bekavana. Vehibit. They had to look at it intently. In other words, there had to be itbonenut. What does that itbonenut do? It makes them totally better people. It's a general wellness, not just being not just doing teshuvah for what they said, but in general realizing that this is a sign that they're not connected enough to Hashem, and that's also why the refuah didn't come just like it came by Avimelech immediately. No. The refuah had to come in a way that Moshe Rabbeinu made the snake, and he put the thing, and they had to look intently, because the intention is not just taking away the punishment is easy. Avraham did it from Abimelech. He prayed, punishment was taken away. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu is doing something much more deep. He's looking at the overall well-being of the Jewish people, and there's no shortcuts. Hashem tells him, show them that you care. You have to be involved in this yourself personally. Take your money. Make a snake. They'll look at the snake. In other words, you want them to become better people? You want them to move to a better space? It's not going to happen hocus pocus. You give them the tool, but they have to go through the process of teshuvah. Yeah, the process of mishabdim et livam lashbiv sheshmaim. They should commit their hearts, in a way, enslave their hearts. In other words, totally tie up their hearts to the Father in heaven. So now we have an unbelievable look at what's going on over here. This story is not just a story of forgiveness. This story is a story where the forgiver looks back at the person and says, I'm not just talking about what you did wrong. Let's look at what caused you to do wrong. What kind of a situation were you in that you could have fallen to this low level? Let's heal you totally. The healing totally, and Hashem agrees. Spend your money, put up the snake, let them take the message of what you're sharing, let them vehibit, let them gaze and intently meditate on Hashem, and then they're going to be indeed in the pre-sin state. But now let's see what this tells us. Look how Rashi teaches it. Paragraph 6. This is why Rashi says, Mekan lemisham vakshmena mechila. Remember we said that Rashi uses a different language. He doesn't say that the forgiver should not be a cruel person. He says the person should not be cruel from not forgiving. When you say that the forgiver shouldn't be cruel, we're talking about the person who's forgiving. He shouldn't be a cruel person. In other words, if you don't forgive the other person, and he's going to get punished because of you, so you're cruel. So that concept that you shouldn't be cruel and let somebody else suffer, that we don't learn from here. That we know from Avimelech. Avimelech, if Avraham Avinu would not have forgiven him and prayed for him, Avimelech would have continued to suffer. So we learn, don't be cruel and let somebody else suffer, forgive him and pray for him. But what we're learning here is something deeper. The chiddush, the novelty of this teaching is, Mikan, from this we learn something deeper. Shelo yehei achzari milim chol. Not just you shouldn't be cruel and let the other person suffer. And that's why you should forgive. But we're talking about the way you forgive. That the forgiveness should not be in a way that you are cruel. What does that mean? When a person forgives somebody else just to the extent that it takes away his punishment, it's not a deep and true and authentic forgiveness. It's, in a sense, the Rabbi coins here a term, an achzorus dike mechila. Mechila achzarit. It's kind of a two-faced forgiveness. It's a kind of a cruel forgiveness, it's a forgiveness, but it's not a total forgiveness. Because there's still some kind of resentment that the forgiver may carry in his heart. A kapeda. He still feels upset at what happened, but he manages to forgive. So the person, I don't want anybody else to suffer because I'll forgive you. But there's still a deep resentment in his heart. So the mechila is not a full, wholehearted mechila. It's in a way of achzariyut. Yeah. It's in a way of achzariyut. It's a very, very, very finely nuanced diuk here. But the Rebbe says in Hara 46, in Hara 45, the Rebbe says also the language, Shelo yehei achzari milimchol, you shouldn't be cruel to withhold forgiveness. This also sounds like even if you have to forgive many times. In other words, don't withhold the forgiveness. When you say a person shouldn't be cruel and not forgive, that's a one-time thing. Don't be cruel. You say the person shouldn't be cruel from withholding mechila, it means that his withholding mechila could be a recurring thing. Could be that the thing comes back to bother him, and once again he has to let go of it. Maybe it comes back, he has to let go of it. I'm not sure about this deal. I have to think into it. But why does Rashi say here, Mikan? Why does Rashi take this home to us right away? What is the language of Rashi? Mikan? I'm going to come back to this. Remind me. I want to come back to this. First, let's finish the sichel and come back to Hara 46. I think very important. Okay, now let's go back to the fact. Remember we said there's two girsaot. There's two versions. Shelo yehei achzari milimchol. You shouldn't be cruel from not forgiving. Or shelo yehei achzari limchol. Don't be cruel to forgive. The way we've just explained it, there could be a way of being cruel in your forgiveness. In other words, this other girsa, shelo yehei achzari limchol. Don't be cruel in the way you forgive, which would mean you forgive just to a certain extent, but you don't really release the resentment. Now, whenever there's two girsaot, the Rebbe is teaching us, we touched on this in 1 or 2 weeks ago also. When there's two girsaot, we have to try and understand which girsa could be a mistake. In other words, how do mistakes come in versions in girsaot? By the way, even today, but more so in olden days when you were copying manuscript to manuscript, the person who was copying understood what he was copying. And if he saw something that didn't make sense, he may have changed it he may have assumed that the earlier manuscript had a mistake, and he would have fixed it. So when you have two versions, you have one version that seems to make sense, one version that doesn't make sense. We want to know which one is more authentic. So what are the chances? If somebody's copying something that makes sense, would he then change it to something that doesn't make sense? Probably not. It makes sense to say that the real version, that something that doesn't make sense was changed to something that makes sense. So if we see two versions of Rashi, one seems to make sense, one doesn't make sense, we would assume that the one that seems to make sense was a later version that was changed by the transcriber who saw something that didn't make sense to him and changed it to something that made sense to him. Whereas if we see, it doesn't make sense to say that the thing that made sense was transcribed in a way that doesn't make sense. We're assuming that it wasn't just a mistake. When we talk about the Bacha, the Zetzer, even in printing, in the olden days, printing wasn't copy, it wasn't offset. You had to retype. You had to set the letters. You needed to be a genius to be a typesetter, lino typesetter, to do all these Jewish manuscripts. And many times, the person that was resetting sometimes if he saw something that didn't seem to make sense, he would change it, thinking there must be a mistake in the manuscript. Change it doesn't make sense. Says the Rabbi here, we have two girsaot in this Rashi. One is Shelo yehei achzari milim chol, don't be cruel to withhold forgiveness. One is don't be cruel to forgive. Which one seems to be a mistake?
Milim chol.
No. Lo yehei achzari milim chol makes sense. Don't be cruel to not forgive. That seems to make sense. The second version, don't be cruel to forgive, seems to be a mistake. Says the Rebbe, that we would say that's probably the real version. And it didn't make sense to the person who was writing it, who was transcribing it, so he changed it. Don't be cruel, milim chol, to not forgive. Because nobody would have changed it the other way around. If you were transcribing something that says don't be cruel not to forgive, you wouldn't change it to don't be cruel to forgive. Don't be cruel to forgive doesn't seem to make sense. So if that's the real version, don't be cruel to forgive, and it just, the other gear says a change by somebody who thought he knew better, what does it mean? Don't be cruel to forgive. So but now we know what it means. Now we can explain, don't be cruel to forgive in a cruel way. Just simply, similarly, says the Rebbe, we have a basic teaching in Torah. If somebody gives charity to a poor person with a bad feeling, with a bad face, we say, even if he gave him 1,000 gold pieces, he lost his credit. He did something good, but he did it in a cruel way. So there is a concept. Don't be cruel in your forgiving, which is basically to forgive him just as much as makes you feel good that the person won't suffer because of you, but not enough to actually care about the person and get rid of that resentment in your heart. So it's a beautiful way the Rebbe learns is comparing texts and telling us this incredible teaching. If you think about it, once you get it, it's eye-opening. You would think that which text is more true, the one that makes sense. But then I was telling you, the way of transcribing, which one would have been changed? The one that doesn't make sense would never have been a change that somebody consciously makes from something that makes sense. So take a look at the thing that you think doesn't make sense and dig deep, and maybe it actually has a deeper meaning you just didn't get. And that's the danger when we transcribe things and we don't truly understand what the author is saying. We may make changes which change the whole in today's world, we know with AI. In today's world in AI, you can, God forbid, have this when the doctor is walking, taking notes and saying, put this in this amount of medicine. Till now, there was a nurse taking notes, but now the AI overhears what he's saying. But if he overhears a whisper, they call it a ghost whisper from the other end of the room, something else, and it can insert it into that, and all of a sudden it can be something that doesn't make sense. So today, there's a whole different discussion about, but in the olden days, it was transcribed by humans. So here the Rebbe says, the version that doesn't seem to make sense is actually the real version. And the way the Rebbe has shed light on it now, it makes perfect sense. Don't be cruel, don't forgive in a cruel way, which is without forgiving properly. Paragraph 7. According to all this, we'll be able to explain also some differences in the Rambam. Okay, so basically, until here, we've explained the Rashi is very explanatory to us. Okay, I want to go back now just for a second to footnote 46. Because Rebbe picks up here on something very interesting. What would be the teaching here? Isn't the teaching here that Moshe Rabbeinu is so great that he forgives them? Why does Rashi right away go and say it's a lesson to us? Says the Rebbe, you know why the Rashi doesn't speak about that this tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu that he was not cruel to forgive? Because after everything we've read about Moshe Rabbeinu and the Bnei Yisrael, he gave up his life for them. In the Meraglim, in the story of Korach, this is not where you're going to learn about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was so nice and he wasn't cruel and he always forgave them. We know that about Moshe Rabbeinu already, right? It's not a chidush. It's not something new about Moshe Rabbeinu. It's just another repeat of the same concept. Again, they did wrong, and again, he forgives them. So Rashi's telling us that the reason the Torah tells it to us in such a detail is to teach others. To teach others that even if somebody does something bad against them in this way, they should be forgiving in a way that they look to totally rehabilitate the person that has done the negativity. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, he's done it many times. But Mikan, says Rashi, from here, what we have to learn. The Torah gives us all these details because the Torah is a book of lessons. It's telling anybody who has had anything wrong done against them, don't be cruel and not forgive. Now we're going to embark upon a discussion which is going to include diyukim, a lot of looking at fine combing language of the Rambam, and we'll see that in the Rambam we can see these three concepts also: just forgiving the sin, forgiving the person, and overcoming any resentment till the person is for you as beloved as he was before he did anything wrong. Paragraph 7. According to this, we'll be able to understand some differences in the language of the Rambam, the way the Rambam teaches about forgiving others. Because it's brought at least 3 times in the Rambam, this concept that don't be cruel and withhold forgiveness from somebody. And the laws of behavior, deis, the laws of the way we're supposed to feel, think, and act. The Rambam teaches, when a person sins to somebody else, he shouldn't bear a grudge and hate him. And he shouldn't be quiet and just brim inside with resentment. You should tell the other person did something wrong. And it says that if the other person accepts and realizes he did something wrong, and the person did something wrong, comes back and he asks for forgiveness, then the person who was wronged needs to forgive. The forgiver should not be cruel. That's the way the Rambam says it in the laws of deot, in the way a person should behave. In the laws of teshuvah, the Rambam says it a little differently. A person should not be cruel, and not agree to be placated, to be appeased. He should be he should be easily appeased. He should be resistant to getting angry. When somebody who sinned against him asks him to forgive, should forgive him with a complete heart and with a willing soul. Okay, that's the second time we taught this halacha. Then there's another time we taught the halacha in the laws of damages. What does it say there? That the one who was damaged, was injured, the one who was injured is not allowed to be cruel and withhold forgiveness. This is not the way of the Jewish seed, the Jewish children. Once the injured person has requested from him, and is even beseeched him, first time, second time, and you know that he really has returned, walked back from the sin he did, and he has regrets about the bad he did, you should forgive him. This is all language of the Rambam. And anybody who is quick to forgive, he's praiseworthy, and when the spirit of our sages finds him pleasant. So now, that was a mouthful, but basically 3 times this halach, same halakha I said, but now that I was going to look at all the different languages in each of these 3 times. First, in Hilchot Deot, in the laws of behavior, the Rambam says, if he came back and asked for forgiveness, he should forgive him. The forgiver should not be cruel. In Hilchas Tshuva, the laws of Tshuva, the laws of damages, it says it's forbidden. Asur la'adam liot achzari. It's forbidden for the person to be cruel. Asur nechba liot achzari. Here it doesn't say asur. It says v'lo yehei amochel. He shouldn't be. Sounds like a suggestion. Number 2, another difference is in the laws of damages, the Rambam speaks about the details. In what circumstances should he forgive him? He says, once the person has beseeched him, we really know that he's regretting what he did, then you should forgive him. In the laws of tshuva and in the laws of behavior, he doesn't say about that the forgiver should wait for 2 times and be sure that the one who's asking forgiveness really means it. And he also brings in the laws of tshuva, he brings something similar, that if the guy didn't want to forgive him, he should bring 3 people and ask in front of them and ask a second time and a third time. But in the laws of injury, he says, Ela yehei noach. he says you should know that the person in the laws of Teshuvah, he speaks about he speaks other details. He says that in general, a person should be easy to be appeased, be difficult to anger. And when the sinner asks for him to forgive him, he should forgive with a full heart and with a desirous soul. And even if he caused him a lot of aggravation, he sinned a lot to him, he shouldn't bear a grudge and he shouldn't do any revenge. And this is the way that Jewish seed, this is the way the Jewish offspring behaves. So, we see this whole lengthy discussion in the laws of injuries, which doesn't appear in Deus and Teshuvah. Number 3, we look at the exact language in the laws of Deus. It says, the forgiver shouldn't be cruel. In Hilchot Teshuvah, it says, Asur la'adam, doesn't call him the forgiver. It says a person is not allowed to be cruel. In the laws of injuries, it says, Vasur le'nechbal, the injured person is not allowed to be cruel. We're calling him mochel, adam, and nechbal. Number 4, another difference is in the continuation of the language in the laws of Teshuvah, says a person is forbidden to be cruel, v'lo yitpayes, and to not be able to be appeased. In the laws of injury, it says asur lechbal liot achzor, a person shouldn't be cruel and not forgive. Laws of Deus, it doesn't say bechlal what the person should not be like. It just says you should forgive. Says the Rebbe in paragraph 8, we can explain that there's 3 different details and levels of forgiveness happening here, and that's why they're said in different languages. There's 3 divisions in the need of forgiving, how halacha requires us to forgive. Number 1, in the laws of chov elamazik, laws of injuries, the Rambam is telling us that the classification of forgiveness, the way it pertains to somebody who did an injury to somebody else, is that this sin of the injury should be able to go away. He did a visible injury. This sinful act, this wound he caused somebody else, should be absolved. He has to pay for it, and then he has to ask forgiveness. In the laws of Tshuva, number 2, in the laws of Tshuva, the Rambam speaks about how it pertains to the Tshuva of the person who sinned. How can we help make sure that the person who's doing Teshuvah should be forgiven with a true heart? So we need that the forgiver should forgive with a true heart, not just wipe away the actual action that was done, but actually cause the person who's trying to become, it's the laws of Teshuvah, the person who's trying to come close to Hashem, to be able to see that he should be able to be close to Hashem just as he was before the sin. Whereas in the laws of Deot, laws of behavior, the Rambam is speaking about how the person who is forgiving, we're talking about how a person should behave, how the forgiver, what kind of behavior process we need to have in our life so that if something wrong was done to us, we know how to forgive. We're talking to the forgiver specifically. So in other words, the laws of chov elam, the laws of injury, we're talking about, boom, a damage. The Rambam is going to tell us how to take away, how to offset both the financial aspect of the damage and also the sinful aspect of the damage. You have to ask for forgiveness and the person should forgive. In Hilchos Tshuva, we're talking about a person who's coming back to Hashem. He's done something wrong to somebody else. We're turning to the person who was wrong and saying, this man wants to come back to Hashem. You do everything you can to totally absolve him so that he can come back to Hashem with nearness the same way he was before. In Hilchot Deot, we're first and foremost looking at the person that was wronged and saying, how are you going to deal with life? How are you going to be a better person? Even though somebody did something wrong to you and you feel angry, you should forgive. 3 different aspects of the same person asking forgiveness and the person forgiving. That's why the Rambam in Hilchos Deis starts off, when a person sins to somebody else, he shouldn't be quiet and have resentment in his heart. It's a mitzvah to tell him. In other words, the mitzvah not to have resentment and the mitzvah to tell the other person has not so much to do with a sinner. It's about the person who's been afflicted by what somebody else did to him. We're saying we don't want you in Hilchot Deot. Let go of it. We don't want you to have a sin because the other guy did a sin to you. The proper way to behave is not to walk around feeling resentment for the guy. That guy did something wrong, not you. Tell him. Get it out of your heart. Tell him. We're telling you how to behave. Tell him. And now we're saying also, if the person does ask forgiveness, don't be cruel. He's not saying there's a prohibition or that he has to come and ask 2-3 times. Here we're talking about the person we're addressing the person who something has been done wrong to, telling him don't walk around with it in your heart because then you're just going to be doing bad to yourself. Let him know if he comes and asks you for forgiveness, the best thing for you is just let it go. Forgive him. Don't be cruel about it. As soon as he asks, forgive him. In the laws of injuries, chovel mazik, the Rambam is talking about how to get atonement for the mazik, for the chovel. Here's somebody that did something bad. He injured somebody else. We're looking at him and saying, you have to pay. And Allah is telling him, you also have to make good with the other person. And he's telling him, your sin is not going to go away until that other person you did bad to, the injured person, forgives you. And that's why we're saying that if the person, the person who created the injury asked one time, the second time, and the injured person knows that he really means it, you should forgive him. In other words, that person has to make an effort. We're looking at that person doing teshuvah. If he really shows he really means it, so forgive him. Because if he's gone all the way to try and achieve forgiveness, we're interested in that person being forgiven. So don't be cruel and forgive him. However, in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam is speaking in general. The person that did an injury to somebody else, we want him to be able to wipe himself and come close to Hashem as if he was before the sin. What do we say about Teshuvah? In Hilchos Tshuva, in the earlier halach, it says, that Teshuvah and Yom Kippur cannot bring atonement unless the person does Teshuvah. It's not just, unless he really fixes his problem. Right? In other words, he comes back to Hashem and is truly repentant. He's truly has regret. But when it comes to Averis, not between him and Hashem, Averis between him and others, for example, somebody causes injury to somebody else, or goes low, he steals from him. It's not forgiven forever until his friend, till he pays back his friend whatever he stole from him, and he appeases him. Even if he paid back the monetary loss that he took from somebody else, he's still not atoned because there's another aspect. He has to appease him, and he has to ask him to forgive him. And that's why the Rambam here, when we're talking about the person achieving a level of tshuva, he says, the forgiver should not be cruel and not agree to be forgiven. Even though that would seem to be in the laws of Deot, telling a person how to behave. We're saying no, because we're talking here to the person who wants to do teshuvah. The person who wants to do teshuvah needs to not just give back what he took from somebody else, but needs to achieve that the other person should look at him without resentment. So we're telling the person who bad was done to him, help this person in the process of teshuvah. And allow him to be beloved before Hashem as if before the chet. So don't withhold the teshuvah. And that's why it doesn't talk here necessarily about asking 3 times. What it's saying, the moment the person asks for teshuvah, give it with a complete heart. Because when a person is able to forgive with a nefesh chafetza, with a leif shalom, with a full heart, when he's asked, that means that he's let go of the resentment. If he's let go of the resentment, now that person who's doing teshuvah has fixed the issue, and now he can be beloved before Hashem as he was before the chet. And this is also, paragraph 9, this is also the reason for the other changes in language. In the laws of injury, Chavel Mazik, it says, the injured person is not allowed to be cruel and not forgiven. Hilchos Tshuva says, it's forbidden for the person to be cruel and not agree to be placated. And Hilchavat Chavel Mazik, the laws of injury, so what's the differences? The laws of Chavel Mazik, mainly we want that the forgiveness is about the injury that was done. And therefore we're talking to the injured person, don't withhold forgiveness for the injury. We're trying to, remember that first level, we're trying to wipe away the actual act that was done, and the person shouldn't have punishment for it. In Hilchos Tshuva, we're trying to rectify the person. We're not just trying to take away the the punishment of what was done wrong. Right? We're trying to have the person, Ayid, this Jew, should be able to be rectified. So we're saying that if a Jew, because he wants to help his friend, that's the natural state. You want your fellow Jew should be helped. So therefore, you should immediately agree to be appeased, not just limchol. Language is agree. The person should not be cruel. V'lo yitpayes, much stronger language. Not be appeased. He shouldn't be cruel and not be appeased is much stronger than saying he shouldn't be cruel and forgive. Appeased is one stage after mechila. Mechila could mean he forgives, but he still has resentment. Yitpayes, to be appeased, is a higher level. So in Hilchos Tshuva is saying that you care about your friend. He did something wrong, but now he wants to do teshuvah. You care about him as a person, like Moshe Rabbeinu cared for the Bnei Yisrael. Not just that the sin shouldn't be there, but the person should be better. So if you're an Adam, if you're a human and a fellow Jew in this case, to your fellow Jew, don't make it difficult to become appeased. This way, when you're appeased, the other person can have a full teshuvah. And according to this, we'll also be able to figure out another stira, a contradiction in Rambam. There's a big question in the Rambam. What's the big question in the Rambam? For those that, for the yeshiva bachim, this is going to be a very impressive thing. It's going to be a very impressive thing that there's one of the favorite shiurim in the yeshiva is always going to be when you find a stira in the Rambam. Because the Rambam is a book of halachas. The Rambam has a psak halacha in one part of his Sefer Hayad in one way, and then you find something else in the Rambam which seems to say the opposite. Stira the Rambam in the Gemara, you could have different opinions. Maybe it's this opinion said this, the other Raf said that. The Rambam is one person, and if he's going in halacha like this, right over here, and somewhere else he says left, contradiction, and then we have to figure out what did the Rambam mean. So there's books and books that are written about these things. So here the Rebbe presents a well-known stira contradiction in Rambam. In the laws of injury, the Rambam writes, that when somebody damages somebody else financially, the moment he made restitution, he paid back what he had to pay, he's forgiven. He doesn't have to ask for forgiveness. Whereas in the laws of Teshuvah, the Rambam says that there are certain sins that are bein adam lechavero, between two humans. And the Rambam says if you did something bad to somebody else, he's not forgiven till he pays back financially what he took from his friend. And he appeases him. So the laws of injury, he says, once you gave it back, forgiven. In the laws of Teshuvah, he says, once you gave it back, not enough. You have to actually get the other person to forgive you, not just pay back his loss. Stira, contradiction of the Rambam. In one place, the Rambam says enough just to pay back. The other place says, no, you have to actually do the emotional work of getting that person to forgive you. So how can we explain how the contradiction is like this? Because when we're talking about the kind of forgiveness for somebody who damaged somebody else's finances, for that, when we talk about varum, but the su kaporas achet, farmazik zayin blaze momin chaverei, the kind of atonement that we're talking about to take away the sin of damaging somebody else's money, causing him loss, you don't have to ask forgiveness. But when we're talking about, in other words, taking away the sin, if you paid back, you took away the sin. But when we talk about Ritzuya Adam, when we talk about the person, in L'chot Shuvah, the person moving back to a relationship with Hashem, as he was before the sin, not just taking away the sin, but making the person healthy again spiritually. So for that, it's not enough just to pay back the financial damage. For that, he has to fix the relationship with the other person. The other person has to forgive him. So this is a very strong resolution that the Rabbi gives. And the Rabbi in the footnotes, of course, brings that that there's a difference between damaging somebody else's money or stealing somebody else's money. But whatever the case is, here the Rabbi says the difference is: are we taking away the sin, Or are we causing healing? Not just the sin going away, but are we calling healing to the person? Hilchas Teshuvah is talking about the person coming back to Hashem. For that, it's not enough you paid the money. For that, you need to fix the problem. We know that in human relationships, somebody did something bad to somebody else. I've seen it happen. Somebody will come, he didn't pay, and you see that, okay, they came before me, we agree, sign, the person is going to pay the other person. After he pays them back, what's going to happen? Okay, they'll shake hands. This person has no claim because that person paid back. But will they do business with each other again? For that, there needs to be a restoring and a repairing of the relationship. It's not enough that you've taken away the claim from one to the other. You have to repair the relationship. Hilchas Tshuva is about repairing the relationship of the person with Hashem. For that, it's not enough that you paid back the person that you did wrong to. You also have to achieve a deeper level, which is Yiratzeh. You should actually appease him. Well, just 1 second, we'll come to it in a second. Ais Yud, paragraph 10. And here is the final punchline. Everything we're talking about here, the way we have to interact with each other, we have the concept of the Midrash that says, Magid Dvarav Li'Yaakov, Chukam Mishpatav Yisrael. Which is, simply speaking, means Hashem tells us his words, tells Yaakov his words. He tells his mitzvahs to Yisrael. The Medrash says, this every Bar Mitzvah boy says, every Chabad Bar Mitzvah boy says this Medrash. Magid Dvarav Li'Yaakov, the Medrash says, there are some kings that they tell other people what to do and they don't do it themselves. You ever seen the traffic cops? They tell everybody else to stop at the red light, but they go through if they're going on an emergency mail, but sometimes not an emergency. They wanted to go get a coffee in Dunkin' Donuts, so they went through the red light. Everybody else has to stop, they don't have to stop. There are some kings like that, they make rules for others. And then there's Hashem. And about Hashem it says, he makes, he shares with us his mitzvahs. Magid Varav, Yaakov, Chukav u'mishpatav Yisrael. The mitzvahs he does, that's what he tells us to do. So when he tells us, in other words, any mitzvah that we have, he's already acting in that same way. So if Hashem told us that Darkam Shel Zera Yisrael V'Libam Anachon, that the way of the Jewish person is to forgive if asked to be forgiven, and to forgive, not just to forgive. The Rambam says, "Belev Shalem V'Nefesh Chafetza." The Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, with a complete heart and with a complete desire of the soul, and to do it immediately, and even about an individual damage that was done to somebody else. The Rambam says in the laws of injury, anybody who's quick and swift to forgive and doesn't make the other person come and beg, is praiseworthy. And our sages had great nachas, said that that's the way you should act. If that's the way Hashem wants us to act, obviously that's the way Hashem himself is acting. So we understand that how much more so in the midah of Hashem, the way Hashem's attributes work. We know that rachamim mechila midat rachamim umidotav hakdoshot, that forgiveness is from Hashem's attribute of mercy and it's from His holy attributes. And Hashem's mercy is without any limitation. And we also know that if Hashem tells us we have to be quick to forgive, so Hashem for sure, how much more so is memaher, is swift to forgive the Jewish people for anything they may have done wrong. And in a way of chen, v'chesed, v'rachamim, of grace, kindness, compassion, b'tov anir v'anigla, in a revealed state of good. And this itself will help and arouse the Jewish people that they should do teshuvah, because Hashem forgives us, that itself gives us an impetus to come closer to Him. We return closer to Him. We know that Jews do teshuvah at the end of Golos, and immediately they become redeemed, the complete redemption. So here we've laid out in great length what the Rashi is telling us. We moved it into the halach of the Rambam, and basically we come out that there's two general ways that we can talk forgiveness. We can talk forgiveness, which could be a cruel forgiveness, where you granted the person who wants forgiveness their wish. I won't hold it against. Okay, I forgive you for the act you did. But that's still like giving a gift without a smile. You gave it to him, you granted him, but you didn't really mend the relationship. And then there's the deeper level of when somebody asks that you allow yourself to rid yourself of the resentment, you allow yourself to try and help that person, not just get rid of the after effect of the sin, but to actually become a healed person. To the extent that you should be able to repair that relationship, allow him to repair the relationship with you to the extent where you'll be able to be with him as if it was before. It's a deep level. It takes a lot of self-restraint and self-work. But if we do it, we know that Hashem is doing it, and of course we want Hashem to do it and take us out of the golus now.